Welcome to DeFiChain Demystified, where we dive deeper in special topics of DeFiChain. The goal is to bring answers to some tricky questions and maybe even bust some myths. We are
Kügi,
and Lord Mark, and today's topic is
how does DeFiChain integrate Ethereum transactions into Bitcoin?
well done, Kügi. Fantastic. Long title, everything perfect. How are you today?
I'm perfectly fine. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks a lot. Hey, it's great to have you here again. This is kind of the third part. So for the viewer who is watching closely, this is going to be kind of the third part of a series that we started. Maybe you can give some hint what we discussed in the first two videos already and what the titles were. Can you remember?
Yeah, we can either say it or we say, please leave a comment if you watched the previous videos.
So I leave this to you.
No, it's been some time. I think it was already half a year or something ago.
That's right.
That we talked about how DeFiChain on the transaction level, on the really how the blockchain works, basically, to explain how the Bitcoin level works, and then how we build DeFiChain on top of that. And now we are building and soon releasing the next level on top of that. So yeah, and since it's now clear how this will happen or how this is going to be, let's talk about it. I mean, it's the topic that everybody's waiting for. So it's DeFi meta chain, if people didn't realize that yet. So we're talking about how the meta chain basically connects both worlds. And
Cool.
stop the teaser. Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So guys, don't miss the first two videos. They were really cool. Good. You brought some cool graphics and animations, like always.
Of course.
Fantastic. The story of the
awesome.
transaction is a story of misunderstandings, I guess, right?
The story of DeFi meta chain integration is a story of misunderstanding.
Okay, perfect. Let's bust these
Maybe
myths then. Let's go.
Because what today is about is how we actually put the Ethereum or EVM transactions, so our DMC transactions, into our existing transaction model, because we have a existing transaction model. And to explain that, I think it's best to start with how does our existing transaction model work. As we said, there are two separate videos for that, where we go into deeper into the topic. I just want to give a quick overview so people don't have to watch the whole thing. As a reminder, DeFiChain is built on top of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin model is a UTXO model, which means you have your list of blocks. So blockchain, a chain of blocks, one after the other, and the block consists of transactions. And each transaction has a list of inputs and outputs. And if you want to spend something, so basically a transaction just says those inputs come in and they are transferred to those outputs. So an input says from this previous address to that amount of coins come in, and that amount of coins come in, and that amount of coins come in. And it says, okay, take those coins from those addresses and send them that amount of coins to that address, and so on. And the validation basically makes sure that the sum of the input coins is more than the sum of the output coins. The difference between the sum of the input and the sum of the output is the fee that the miner gets. So that's exactly the transaction fee. It's just the difference between the output and the input. And then if you have such a transaction that sends something to your address, this is a transaction output. And as long as you didn't use that, it's an unspent transaction output. That's where the UTXO comes from, because UTXO is just unspent transaction output. And an input is always just the output of a previous transaction. So if you want to use this output and send it to someone, basically another transaction will just use this output as an input, and then you can send it further. That's how UTXOs work. That's how Bitcoin works, and that's how the DeFi chain, so DFI UTXO model works. When you because we always have this DFI token, DFI UTXO. That's the UTXOs. That's how you pay the fees in the chain and everything. So this is the basic.
Also how every Bitcoin fork works, right? So most likely Litecoin and Dogecoin, and they all have kind of the same system, right?
That's all. Everyone that stays on the UTXO model, because I mean, if you fork Bitcoin, you theoretically could just change everything. But if you stay, usually they stay on that, and therefore that's how all of them work. That's the underlying technology of Bitcoin. And now with DeFiChain, we forked that, and we added our DeFiChain virtual machine, as we call it. So because that was the goal in the beginning, to say we have a native DeFi on Bitcoin. And one special thing about these outputs is that you have basically a script part in there that's usually used to say which address should this go to, because you have different types of addresses, how to calculate the address and everything. So this tells you usually where the output goes to, and those are the opcodes in the output. And you could put anything in those opcodes, basically. You could just make a script. You can write messages in there. That's how people, every time you hear someone say there is a message encoded in the Bitcoin blockchain, that's how they do it. They just make an output where just this message is in. It's not spendable because it doesn't go to an address. It usually doesn't have a value or anything. It's just an output in an address, and then it's in a transaction, and then it's there. And what we did is we used those opcodes and added our own opcodes to the code. And we said, okay, we have the DeFi opcodes, and they are in this transaction. In the first output, you have a DeFi opcode for all the actions that we want. So for every DeFi action, like a swap, a take loan, a withdrawal, a payback, whatever you want to do in the DeFi world, what we added on top are just custom opcodes that we added to the code, to the DeFiChain code, that tell the DeFiChain node what to do. For example, it's if I have a swap, it's just really encoded into this transaction. In the script part of this output stands, this is now the opcode is swap, so this is a swap, and it should go from this address, this amount of tokens, to this token, this type of token, to this token, to this address with this max price. This is basically written in there in byte form, so that it's just encoded in there that this should be the swap. And the native, the full node, evaluates that the input of this transaction, of the swap, for example, matches the input of the UTXO level, so that the signing and everything is fine, and then just executes that. So if you think about it within the transaction model, the UTXO model, if you don't look at, or if you don't know what these DeFi opcodes are, you don't need to care, because it's still, as you look at it, it's still a native standard UTXO transaction with inputs, with outputs. This output has some special opcode, but the UTXO model is like, I don't need to care. I just take my UTXOs, and this one is just a message that someone sent it. And therefore, it's still just a valid DeFi it's UTXO transaction. And the fee for this transaction is still via this. That's why you need UTXOs to do DeFi transaction, because you need to create such a transaction, and you need UTXOs as input, and then you have to change as output. The difference is again the fee to get into the block. So this is how we added this DeFi on top, this native DeFi on top of UTXO, how we got DeFi transaction in. And I sometimes say it's like a bit sneaked in, so without anyone noticing.
It's kind of a parasite sitting on a main chain, right? So on a main transaction, it's like on top of
it's not,
and
not
riding.
on top, basically.
Okay.
It's inside. It's
okay.
That's depending on how you see it. It's you can say it's on top because you have the transactions, but they are just integrated in the first output. It must be the first output. So that's per definition. That's why we have one DeFi transaction. Also in one UTXO transaction, we can only have one DeFi transaction. But it's basically a bit flying under the radar. If you look at the UTXO level, it's just integrated in there doesn't really do something. But as soon as you understand what the DeFi opcodes do, and you read that, you suddenly get all the DVM, the virtual machine, the native DeFi on top of it.
Okay.
Parasite sounds a bit bad, but let's say nicely integrated. And that's how the DeFi. So basically, UTXO model was the first video. Native DeFi on the UTXO model is the second video, and now we have the third video. And this is how we add Ethereum stuff. And now it's getting interesting because Ethereum transactions are completely different. You don't have UTXO models or UTXOs at all in the Ethereum world. You just have the balance system and the tokens and the smart contracts and everything. And that's what we have in the virtual machine too, where we have the tokens. So within this world, we have the tokens. Outside in the green world, we just have the UTXOs. That's why you also have to convert from tokens to UTXOs to send it to another address, because you can send the tokens, but you can't be sure that the client also is able to read tokens, because they might ignore that and just read the UTXO model of DeFiChain. Perfectly fine, because that's how it's easy to integrate the DeFiChain UTXO model into any exchange. If they have Bitcoin infrastructure and know how to handle Bitcoin code and Bitcoin transactions, they can just read our UTXO model and don't care about that, and then they are pretty fast to integrate it. But yes, now the question is how to integrate that, because EVM doesn't have UTXOs or anything. And the first idea was to have the DMC transaction somewhere outside and put them into a block and then integrate this block somewhere as custom data in the native block or something. There was concepts that looked like the DMC block is somewhere integrated here or something. But now we are close enough to the finish line, so we know how it's actually done, and it's already on DevNet. And the way it's integrated is basically pretty similar to the native, to the DVM, so to the DeFiChain virtual machine transaction, to our native DeFi, by just again using those outputs and say we have again a native transaction, a UTXO transaction, where the first output is just again a special opcode that says this is a EVM data, and the whole EVM transaction is basically a stream of bytes, and just again serialized the whole transaction, what should be done in there with the gas, with everything, the gas limit and everything from the transaction, and what the transaction actually wants to do, which is standard MetaMask transaction, how MetaMask creates it and everything, or every is an EVM client, and it's just encoded in here and put as the first output into a native UTXO transaction. The only big difference we have now, because beside that, if you look just on this level, that is okay, it's a native transaction, a UTXO transaction, and this UTXO transaction contains EVM data for the transaction. The big difference is we don't have UTXOs now. If we want to be completely compatible with MetaMask, for example, where they just send us an EVM transaction and we put that on the chain, they don't know about UTXOs. They can't tell us, use that UTXO from this address and for fees and everything. That's why they have a special case where the input is exactly, we have exactly two inputs in this transaction, but they have opcode 0. So they come from no address and have no value. They are just there basically to identify that this is a EVM transaction with no inputs or with two no operation inputs and no further outputs, just this output, and get into the block as every other transaction. So if you just look at the UTXO model, at the UTXO transactions, nothing special. As a miner or as someone who validates that, I would question why the miner took this transaction, put it into the block, because there is no UTXO fee. But it's a valid transaction, it doesn't invalidate anything. As a EVM validator, if I know how EVM or how the DMC works on top of that, I see that there was gas paid within the EVM transaction. Therefore, it's clear why the miner took it in. So that's on top of that. But beside that, it's really just integrated like that EVM transaction in there. And therefore, we have the full compatibility to MetaMask. And only one additional special thing is, till now, as long as we are in this area, we had the Bitcoin address types, the SegWit, the classic Bitcoin address types and everything. And now, because EVM has different transactions or different address types, and now also a change that we have since DMC development, that now we also allow the Ethereum address types on DeFiChain. They are not allowed to, the code, the node itself doesn't allow currently to have UTXOs sent there and spent from there, because it doesn't make sense. But theoretically it would be possible, it's just not activated. And they are just there that you have the EVM transactions and can send from Ethereum address, trigger a transaction in EVM. So now we have basically really both worlds in there. That we say we have the UTXO model from Bitcoin. We built the native DeFi on Bitcoin, still on the Bitcoin level or Bitcoin technology, and now we connect it to Ethereum transactions, Ethereum model, Ethereum EVM, and have now both worlds smoothly integrated within the DeFi chain.
Question,
And yeah,
Kügi.
yes.
You said or you wrote that the fees are paid in DFI tokens.
Yes.
For this EVM transaction. So how does this really work? So how do I ask this question? So
okay, maybe
it's not UTXO.
I show you some.
Okay.
I think I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
Maybe I show you something. Just one quick thing, because to finish that. So in the future, when we look at our blocks, we will likely have a mixture everywhere. Every block will have some normal transactions, UTXO transactions, some transactions with DeFiChain, so with the DVM, our DeFi, and some transactions with the EVM. That's just how to think about the blocks in the future. And that's why I say it's so smoothly integrated and combined, because it's just every block has a bit of UTX native Bitcoin logic, a bit of native DeFi, a bit of EVM. And about your stuff, so if we maybe this side helps, when you now look at such a block, it's basically within DeFiChain, within the node, within the full node, we basically have three machines, three engines, when you want to look at it like that. You have the UTXO model that keeps track of the UTXOs and the UTXO balance and everything, where you only have the DeFi UTXOs. So DeFi not tokens, DeFi coins as UTXOs, as we have it with Bitcoin. Then you have the DVM, our DeFiChain virtual machine, where you have our D tokens, which are DFI as token, the token version of DFI, and you have all the other D tokens there, and the vaults and everything. And in the future now, we will also have the EVM, so the metachain, DeFi metachain, the EVM layer, where you have the ERC20 tokens. And there we will also have a DFI token, not the native token, not the DVM token, DeFi token, DeFi token, but the ERC20 version. Basically, like Ethereum has the native token Ethereum. It's not directly an ERC20, it's the native token of Ethereum. It's the ETH. It is. And basically, like on the UTXO model, for Bitcoin, the native UTXO coin is Bitcoin. We have as the UTXO native coin DFI, and we have the same on the EVM. Our native EVM token is DFI. And we have usually all the DeFi transactions are happening in here. All the UTXO model is happening just in here, and the EVM is just happening in here. One special thing is the transfer of balances. So now we had this transfer of UTXOs to tokens and tokens to UTXOs. And that is just moving DFI from here to here or back. And now with the DMC, we have the same logic, just also for the EVM, that you can move DFI from UTXO to DeFi tokens and you can move DeFi tokens to DeFi Ethereum version tokens.
Can I go directly as well, or do I always have to take the step from UTXO to DVM, from DVM to EVM, or can I go from UTXO to EVM directly?
I think you can only go between those two and those two. I don't know if there's any. I would need to check because there is an EVM out and EVM in. I think it's just between those two.
Okay.
So you have, if you want to go from UTXO to EVM, you need to go to the DeFiChain token and then to EVM token through the DVM. Yeah. But I'm not 100% sure. I think it's like that, but I'm not 100% sure. And then you have your DFI token. So, and that's also like we have with the UTXO model. If you move DFI UTXOs to DeFiChain or to DVM, they are burned on this side and created on this side. So the total amount of DFI doesn't change. And it's the same here. If you move them from the DVM to the EVM, they are removed here and added here, and the other way around. So the total amount of all DFI everywhere is always stays the same no matter how you move them between the layers or the engines. And that's where the gas then comes in, because if you have an EVM transaction, you pay the gas with this. So that's a bit of a difference between those two, because here you pay the fee in UTXOs. Here you also pay the fee in UTXOs because it's still the UTXO models. Here you pay the fee in gas within the EVM. So that's a bit the difference. That here you pay it in there. So you say, I want to do that EVM transaction, and the node says, okay, I take the gas from your account, from your balance, you have to pay that gas, and that's it.
Fully understand. So then you don't have to reserve a UTXO to pay for the fees because it's on the new layer. Okay, get it.
Exactly, and that's necessary. Because otherwise MetaMask couldn't send the transaction, because if you would need UTXOs to
MetaMask cannot
pay
deal
the
with
fee,
UTXOs, right?
MetaMask just sends us the stuff that comes in here and doesn't know about it, and that's the nice thing about that. It's nicely integrated into the normal transactions, but no one from outside doesn't need to know about the UTXO version here, because our node, our RPC, just takes the EVM transaction that needs to be signed and everything. It verifies that the signing in there is already correct and everything. And if someone from outside requests, give me all the EVM transactions, it just gives all the EVM transactions, each block, that are integrated in there. So from the outside, it looks like a EVM chain. If you go through that endpoint, basically. So anyone who is requesting this side of the engine about the transaction, what's happening, the statuses and everything, for them it looks like a EVM chain. And anyone who asks about the DeFi chain, the native DeFi and the UTXO, for them it looks like a Bitcoin chain. So it's really an integration, a merge of both technologies.
Question, or just to do a little bit recap. So we have DFI as coin, we have DFI as token, and then we have another token that is the EVM token. It is not the ERC20 token. So there's also then a DFI ERC20 token, right? So that would be the...
No,
or is this the ERC20 token in some way?
That's basically the same thing. The thing is, on an EVM, you have your native token, which is basically hard-coded within the system. Like on the DVM, we also have the native DFI token, which is the token with the ID 0. And you can also create new D tokens, but we don't call DFI on the DeFi chain as a D token or a D, because that's the digital asset token where we have the DBTC and everything.
But if it's not on EVM, it's the ERC20 token. And that's also, if I send it to an exchange, if I would send it to an exchange, then this is exactly the same that you can trade at the moment on different exchanges, the ERC20 version of our DFI. This is also the same that is on the EVM layer in our system then, right?
And now you need to be careful,
Exactly, because
yes,
I'm not sure if that's correct what I said now.
yeah, no, it's not. The
Good.
thing is, when you now talk about an ERC20 token,
Yes.
you always have to be careful. Do you talk about an ERC20 talking about the technology? So it's technology-wise an ERC20 or about the network that it's running on?
Okay.
Because often people say, when they say it's an ERC20 token,
Yep.
they mean it's a token on Ethereum, on the Ethereum network, on the Ethereum blockchain.
Okay.
We have now EVM. It's the same technology. So you can do whatever you did on Ethereum here. But if you create an ERC20 token on DeFiChain, it's not on Ethereum.
Okay.
It's
It's
on
still
our chain.
on DeFiChain and is a
Yeah.
DeFiChain transaction. Okay. That's
It's
very
it's a
important. Okay,
it's
get
a
it.
DMC transaction. It's an EVM transaction within the DeFi chain.
Okay.
So you have all of that in here. It's still, but that's still DeFi chain. That's all still the native from the network. It's still DeFi chain. The chain is DeFi chain, and you can't if you now like you have
So the
it with
transport
other.
network is DeFiChain
Yeah,
at the moment. Okay. And also the gas fees are DeFiChain. So if the Ethereum transaction prices go up, we don't care because this is still on our network,
exactly.
right?
It's completely independent
Okay.
when it comes to the chain and the technology. That's like if you think about USDT. USDT is a token. There are the ERC20 tokens and everything, the versions. There are the Tron versions and everything.
Exactly.
And even if they are on the same technology, you need to select what network do you send them on, what network do you work on, and that's why they have chain swaps where they say, okay, they move it from one chain to the other. That's why you have bridges and everything, and
Okay.
that's why we have the Quantum Bridge, for example, where we move the DFI ERC20, so the Ethereum version of DFI, to DeFiChain, to the DeFiChain network. So when you want to move from one chain to another, you need a bridge. If you just do native, just do EVM transaction in the DMC, it's still in DeFiChain.
Okay.
So probably it will be better to not call it ERC20 tokens. If you create a token on Ethereum, on DeFiChain, maybe we call it DMC20 or something, because it's the same technology, how you create the token, how you tell the chain what the token does and everything, how the smart contract, how you put the smart contract in. That's all the same technology. You can use the same code for that, but it's a different chain. And
I think
therefore,
I think it's good to call it the DRC because on Binance chain, what is also EVM compatible is called BRC20, right? And on Ethereum is ERC20. So I think if you would roll with the word DRC, that makes complete sense. Because if I would now send a DFI, let's say to an exchange that is using the Ethereum network, then I still have to go through the bridge, right? Even if it's EVM compatible.
exactly,
That
you'd
was the
still
question.
need
Okay, got it.
so
Conversion to
if
another network, also, right?
if you move to a different network, you need to go over a bridge to that network.
Okay, cool.
But now it will be far easier for different exchanges
Yeah.
to everyone, as we had it with Bitcoin, where they said, okay, if you have a Bitcoin infrastructure, it will be easy to connect DeFiChain to your exchange on the UTXO model because we have exactly the same model as Bitcoin.
Yes.
Now, the same logic will be there for the EVM because as soon as someone says, I have an EVM compatible infrastructure, I can easily add another EVM technology. They just add that in and they read the EVM stuff from our
So
chain
same
and they
kind
can
of
do it.
same language system, right? So we have the Bitcoin
Exactly.
language system, we have the Ethereum Bitcoin language model, and now these both can talk to each other, even if it's a different transport network in that way,
Yeah,
but the language is the same. Okay, cool. That's very good
exactly.
stuff. Okay, I think that's very understandable now.
That's how we integrate it. And that's why it makes a lot of stuff easier. But yeah, don't misunderstand that or don't get the wrong impression about the tokens. It's and I mean that's on a plus and a minus. It's still that any exchange would need to add the DeFiChain ecosystem, basically, or the DeFiChain node to their infrastructure. But it's far easier for them to just add the Ethereum way, because if they have that, and then new tokens, because that's also something, our D tokens, to get the D tokens onto any exchange, they would need to basically evaluate all that and be able to integrate and connect to those interfaces, which are unique to DeFiChain. If we now, in the DMC, have then tokens on the DMC, where people create new tokens, or we have the web tokens from our D tokens that we say, okay, we provide a bridge internally, adding that to their exchange is easier, because that's an technology-wise ERC20 token, and they can just interact with that as they do with Ethereum and with EVM.
Okay, now a question. I'm not sure if you can answer that already, because I think that's a little bit a crystal ball story still. So on the full node, this is all gonna be integrated. Most likely, it has to be integrated, right? Because all the master nodes and everything run on the full node. So how is this then gonna be on the light wallet? The light wallet is not a full node. Are we gonna see there a difference between, or is it just gonna be a DFI?
I don't know what is planned for the light wallet. What I know is that MetaMask is already supporting DeFi MetaChain. Since MetaMask since DMC is just standard EVM interfaces, on the DevNet, where this is already implemented and this is already being tested, there you could take your MetaMask and point it to your new DMC node, so your DeFiChain full node, with the connection, and there do the MetaMask, the normal EVM transactions already. So I don't know if it's necessary that the light wallet will integrate really a full EVM client, because we have MetaMask. Maybe it's better to, I don't know what the plan of the team is. But in my opinion, it might make sense to say, okay, there is already MetaMask. Everybody's used to MetaMask. We provide it via Ocean, that we say, okay, MetaMask can connect to the network there, can connect to Ocean or something, and don't need a full node behind that. But if you add the DeFiChain or the MetaChain network to your MetaMask with Ocean endpoints and everything, then you have everything you want to have in MetaMask. We don't need to implement anything on our own. We don't need to invest the time on the client, but just on the node, just on the network, on the chain itself.
Okay, so all the client integration we're gonna see in the near future, how this is gonna play out. Get it? Okay.
Exactly. But I guess it will be MetaMask, especially in the beginning, to focus on the stuff. One thing, just because I want to say that before, this thing about if it's on MetaChain, it's not automatically on Ethereum and the other way around. So ERC20 tokens are not automatically on MetaChain because it's a different network. That also gives us a lot of potential, because every successful smart contract, every successful protocol or project on EVM, on Ethereum, can now say, okay, I want to also provide this on MetaChain. And we have the launchpad and everything, where we get a lot of funds from the cake, from the accelerator program, where people get paid to do projects on MetaChain. So we attract the project. And now this is a huge potential, in my opinion, that we say, okay, any developer who did something on Ethereum and is successful there can now easily just deploy it to MetaChain. Now, then we have a Uniswap on MetaChain. Any of those exchanges, any of those stuff on MetaChain, where it works the same way, it's just working there. And you get TVL, you get fees and everything. So it's easy to get it there. And it also means we now have a new playing field for EVM developers to deploy their stuff and to get an additional user base and everything. So this is why so many people are so bullish on the MetaChain and what it will do for the ecosystem, because we open up to a lot of people who say, I already have that, it's bulletproof on the other one, I really have experience there, I don't need to do anything, but just deploy the code on the next chain, and everything is fine. And I just get more users, which is a no-brainer to do it. And therefore, that's a lot of potential there.
That's why I like the idea about the language so much, because before there were like two systems, they didn't understand each other, and now the systems can talk to each other in some way because of this kind of new language system that we've integrated, right?
Yes.
Cool. Fantastic, Hugi. I think that's really, really exciting stuff that you showed us here today. That's it, right? Or you prepared something else?
Yes, no.
Not that I
No.
cut
We
you
said
off
we
here.
make it short.
Yeah, no, cool. 30 minutes or 35 minutes already. That's really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Guys, I hope that was helpful. I would say it really is. I think it makes a lot of sense if you look at the graphics and listen to the explanations. Kugi, thanks for putting this together and shedding some light of this mystery thing that is coming up now, DMC. I think a lot of people still cannot really grasp what it is, but it becomes clearer and clearer, right? Thanks for doing your part here to kind of demystifying DeFi MetaChain, and see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
See ya.